I looked at here in the new book. It said, and I want to ask you about this. It says, do not allow yourself to become resentful, deceitful, or arrogant. The first part of that, I've witnessed, and I know that you've lived, and I've never seen an attack on someone like I've seen on you. And I paid attention. You know, I'm a comedian. I talk about cultural issues. I am relatively well versed in what's going on in the public sphere. I've never seen attempt after attempt after attempt to smear and like besmirch a human being as I saw with you. There was much less, and I'm serious about this. There was maybe less negative press about Osama bin Laden than you. I think there was more of like people trying to understand Osama bin Laden. He grew up, and he was disenfranchised, whatever it was. But how do you not, especially because you went through this very powerful ordeal, and I don't know how, and I know that a lot of that was internal family dynamics and your own health and your family's health, but how do you not become resentful against the people that have tried to assassinate your character? Also, do you blame any of them for what you went through recently, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but the ordeal that you went through? Do you blame any of these people? Do you say to yourself, had they not been as aggressive and had they not been as vicious, you might not have been in the situation you were in?
Well, I worked through a lot of the answers to the questions that you're asking while I was writing this second book. The last chapter, the chapter you referred to, do not become resentful, deceitful, or arrogant. Those are the three things that I noticed that were particularly catastrophic to people in my clinical practice. Those three things and their interactions. And then in the final chapter, chapter 12, is be grateful in spite of your suffering. Look, the first thing I'd say is that I've watched people since I've become a public figure. I've watched people, my peers, let's say academics in other places in the world, or people who are roughly my professional peers, who've been the target of attacks on Twitter or in the newspapers in some manner similar to what's happened to me. And my observation has been that it's very, very hard on people. They generally fold up and apologize and are shocked and hurt to a quite deep degree. And so it's no joke to have that happen to you. It's given me more insight into why people are so likely to not say the things they need to say when it's the time to say them, because the trouble that can cause is very difficult to cope with. And so I certainly wouldn't say that it's been without effect. It's also a great mystery to me that it continually happens. I continually expect it to stop, right, but it doesn't stop, and it's hard to understand why that is exactly. I'm trying to understand that all the time. I think to some degree, there's a public attempt to understand that even. And I say that because I'm also the subject of an inordinate number of memes. Right. And they represent who people think I am in a very large number of ways, strange ways. I've become very associated with lobster imagery and with frog imagery and with king imagery and with, the Red Skull imagery. And it's a very complex set of images. And so that all adds to the difficulty of sorting it out as far as I'm concerned. I certainly was tempted towards bitterness and resentment as a consequence of my illness, which created a tremendous amount of pain. And at the same time, or approximately the same time, my daughter and my wife were also very ill. And so it's difficult not to succumb to the temptation to shake your fist at God and curse the clouds and the thunder and the structure of being itself for all the suffering that people go through. but it's not helpful. And I've really strived with the help primarily of my wife, but also of other people close to me, to identify resentful and bitter thoughts and to eradicate them because they're not helpful. They're not justifiable, like under any condition, as far as I can tell. And that's why I tried to illustrate in chapter 12 that gratitude is most properly conceptualized, if it's not naive, as a form of courage. It's sort of like the decision you take when you decide to get married. You know, the trope is that you find the right person and then you just know. But the truth of the matter is that you decide, and then you continually keep deciding day after day while you're living with the person. And gratitude in the face of life suffering is the same thing. It's a decision about an attitude that you are going to strive to bring forward. It isn't so much a considered opinion about the benevolence or lack thereof of the world.
Right.
So, and I just couldn't see when I delved into my thoughts. I thought, this seems unfair. My family is struggling under a tremendous burden of ill health. Not that that's not true of many, many families. I'm very aware of that. And at the same time, this, in some sense, rather unique exposure to continual public pillorying, if that's a word, it probably isn't. But when I delved into it, identified all the thoughts and thought them through, I couldn't see any positive utility. They weren't helping me in any way. So, and I've done a reasonable job of dispensing with them in the last 2 months. I would say at the same time, however, I've also been recovering to a fair degree since I've been properly diagnosed finally.
Now, what was that proper diagnosis for the people that aren't aware of what you went through? Because I know that there was a lot of speculation because there was really no information out there when you kind of disappeared from public life. Yeah.
It's still not exactly clear what happened to me. I've had a long history of depression, and that definitely has played a role in predisposing me to whatever happened over the last few years. But my new physician, I was particularly suffering in the mornings. And by the end of the day, I was back to something approximating normal, but it would take me like 8 hours or so of real effort to even get to the point where I could stand up and move forward without excruciating pain, without believing that I was going to collapse. And then that would recur every morning. Well, he investigated the structure of my sleep and found that I had severe central sleep apnea, and I was waking up 25 times an hour or so. And those are stressful occurrences where you stop breathing. And so I've been using a breathing machine for the last month, and it's improved me from about 5% of function to about 50 or 60%. And I'm still seem to be improving, at least to some degree. And so apparently I was wearing this ring that monitors sleep, and I was getting 0 deep sleep, maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes a night, which is nowhere near enough.
No.
And since I've been using the machine, it's up to more like 30 to 50 minutes. That's where your body restores itself completely, is during deep sleep. And so at least one of the problems that I was facing, it's not the only one, but at least one of them was chronic lack of sleep.